Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
When I hear you tell my story, it's quite funny. I knew when I was 8, as you said, I wanted to be a fireman. Then I saved a life at 13. And my parents, our parents are leaders when we're growing up, and my parents wanted me to be successful. And I wasn't old enough or wise enough to realize that A, my success didn't depend on them approving, and B, that our visions of success were different. And it's only with the value of growing older and looking back on it that I realized they were great leaders, but they never got me. I didn't think they'd get me yet. My mom, who's still alive, or my dad before he died.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting, eh? So how did you get into leadership?
My leadership, I was a know-it-all smart person who just walked into leadership, or so I thought. And I had a lot of hard knocks in the early days of being a type A personality who just thought I was a leader. And what I was an obnoxious little twerp, even in my 20s. But I grew into it. I studied great leaders. I studied people I thought were great leaders. And I just studied my mentors. And so much of what I've learned is by working for good leaders and trying to emulate them.
Yeah, isn't it interesting how a lot of people think they are a leader or they already are good at leadership and so forth, but when they start to look at others, start to learn from others, it's amazing what the gaps that we can see and then what we need to do. For a lot of people, I don't know about what it was like in the US, Dave, when you were there, but a lot of people, when they finish high school or college, they throw the books away and they think, I've learned everything I need to learn now, I'm fine. But I think what happens to us is as we go into our lives, into our careers and into leadership positions, we realize we haven't stopped learning. And that's what I think you've just been sharing, right?
Oh, yeah, I agree 100%. I hated school. I wagged out of or skipped out of 2 years of high school, which nearly caused my death from my parents. But one of the things I see now is that what we learn in primary and early school years is BS. It really, other than reading, writing, and arithmetic, it really hasn't helped me much. Life learning has helped me. And then being pushed into doing some postgraduate study after I finished on the helicopter has really made a difference. But by then I was ready to learn and willing to learn, and it really paid off.
Yeah, so those experiences that you talk about on the helicopter as in your introduction too, I mean, that must have been some fantastic stories that you've got to share and so forth. But that whole experience, Dave, that must have been hair-raising experiences where leadership really was tested at times.
It was when we were on the helicopter, there were usually 3, maybe 4 of us. So the pilot was in command. They are in charge of flying, but we use crew or cockpit resource management. And all of us on the crew had the ability to stop the flight. So if any of us felt uncomfortable, we would say the pilot, not happy, go home. What we know is that when one of us would call out that we were really unhappy, the other 2 were feeling the same way, and it was just the first one to get to it. But sometimes we would work our way through it. So the leadership I learned over time was knowing when not to take off and know when to turn back, as opposed to being the heroes and going through. And that's a lesson I learned early, and it kept me alive for 25-year career.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And so I think there's times when a lot of leaders need to make those decisions. So is there any sort of steps that you do, like initial assessments or anything like that, to help you make those kind of decisions?
Yeah, there's a formula I've been teaching for years, and it's basically SAFE, which is stop, assess the situation, figure out a plan, start executing the plan, and then jump immediately back to the assess. So continually reassessing. One thing I learned flying in bad weather or flying in the low wire environment, just because it's safe now doesn't mean it's safe 30 seconds from now. So the reassessing, constant reassessing is the way we stayed alive in the aircraft. And it's the way I live my life, whether I stop at a car accident and try to help people, or if I'm just trying to make a business decision, that constant reassessment about is it working really pays off.
Yeah, great. And I think that's something that leaders need to do too all the time. They need to reassess. They need to do the safe pieces you talked about, go back to the reassessment and realize where they're at with things in any kind of situation they're at. And I think for a lot of them sometimes can become complacent. They don't do those things, and that's when they get caught out. So I think it's really important that they do those kind of things that you just said those steps, which are really important. Hey, Dave, who's your favorite leader? Now, this person could be alive or from history. Who's your favorite leader and why?
When I read that question, Nelson Mandela and Colin Powell are the two that pop into mind for two very different reasons. Nelson, because of the way he lived his life and demonstrated, and Colin, because he is a great leader in an operational aspect in battle, which is what I found myself in without the guns, but certainly having to think like we're at battle. So those are the two that spring to mind.
Yeah, and Dennis, it's funny. I always get embarrassed when you hear people read that stuff. But what I find, and maybe this will organically come out in our conversation on leadership today as well, is from a background perspective, what's really missing is the most human part of this, which is that I'm a mom and a wife. And my daughter is about to graduate university, and I've been married for 31 years. I've had the privilege in my life to live in many places across the United States and to actually travel and see 6 out of the 7 continents of the world. So I feel at the end of the day, incredibly blessed, because without that structure of a wonderful husband, a fantastic daughter, I could not have done those things that you read.
Yeah, and it's really important for us to have that background structure. I call it actually the backbone of our success, right? It's what really actually holds things together. And if we have that in place, it actually just makes everything else a lot more sweeter in the way that we do things, for sure.
Oh, no doubt about it, Dennis. Said, listen, we couldn't do what we do in the job function. We're going to talk a little bit about that, actually. It was some of the things that I think are on the horizon for leadership. But if you didn't have that, to your point.
Yeah, cool. So, Peggy, how did you get into leadership?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, Dennis, I don't know if there was ever this date that on January 1st, X with Z year, and now we've reached the crown of leadership. I'm not sure that ever. I think it happened organically through a series of life experiences from the time maybe you led on the playground when you were in grade school, right? Maybe you were the person that was chosen that day to lead the dodgeball team or whatever it might have been. And I guess when they formally give you that title where you look is when people start to call you that, which is also a unique thing. And so you're the leader. And you're like, with that, I think comes tremendous responsibility. So I think I got into it by just being there when there was a gap maybe, and stepping into that gap. And I think I have enjoyed it. And I've always tried to do it bi-directionally. And again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that as well.
No, excellent. Yeah, I like what you say as well, that we need to step into the gap of leadership because sometimes there is a gap and who puts their hand up? And I like what you say about the organic, because I think for a lot of people, they fall into leadership by mistake. And it's because for a lot of organizations, they look around and they go, oh, sure, dude. Great. You're the new leader. Congratulations. And we'll see you in 12 months' time. Good luck. And for a lot of people, they don't do too well in that leadership role because they haven't been supported or developed over the years. And it's quite difficult for them to look at things for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So here's an interesting question for you. Now, this person could be alive or from history. Who's your favorite leader and why?
Oh my goodness. I think I step back, Dennis, and as I think about this, I choose a set of characteristics and attributes for a leader. So let me give you that and give you the story here. So I think about individuals that are inspirational, that show up authentically, that have a great deal of humility. Those are major character values for me that when I think about my leadership, or not myself personally, but who is my favorite leader. Yeah, an interesting story for you, Dennis, because I don't know if you're a golf person, but for the golf lovers out there, they'll resonate with this story. So I hope we can bring them along on this. So, a gentleman named Ben Crenshaw. So Ben Crenshaw, back in his day, he was with Arnie and Jack. He's probably maybe the tiger of the time. At any point, any rate, Ben was the captain of the U.S. Ryder Cup team. Now, we both know, Dennis, that golf is largely an individual sport. Okay. Ryder Cup is a competition between the United States and Europe that's played every 2 years, right? And it's where the team where the group of golfers have to come together as a team. Okay. So Ben was the coach. He was the captain, actually, is what they're called. He was the captain of the U.S. Ryder Cup team in 1999. Now, if you follow golf at all, and your loyal listeners that do will know this story quite well. So going into the final round on that, and this was in Brookline, Massachusetts, and my husband and I happened to be there. And going into the final round, the U.S. was down 10-6. And Ben sitting in Europe only needed 4 more points to win the cup. And so Ben's sitting in the media room, and he says this. He said, "I'm going to leave y'all with a thought." He said, "I'm a big believer in fate, and I've got a good feeling about this." There's a couple of asterisks I want to add to this, Dennis. Number one, not only was he telling the crowd, "I got faith and confidence in my team, even if you don't." And his team was in the back listening. They're like, what's he going to go out there and say about us? So you think about the inspiration that he's giving to them, and you could feel his authenticity. Here's where I knew the guy was an incredible leader. Roll forward, it's a couple years later, and I happened to be in London on business. And it's on a Saturday morning, and I went down to the hotel lobby, and I'm having breakfast, and I was by myself, and came out of the breakfast area, and lo and behold, in the lobby is Ben and his wife. And I thought, I gotta go up. I gotta go up and say hi. Oh God. So I walked up to him and I said, "Hi, Ben." Peggy Smith is that. And one of the first things he did, Dennis, he pushed his chair back and he got up and he met me eye to eye. And he introduced his wife to me. And I told him what an incredible thing that was in Brookline, when we talked a little bit of golf and whatever. So we chit-chatted. We went on about my day, went out. Okay, I come back at the end of the day, walk through the bar. Who's in the bar? Ben and Julie. He comes up to me. No kidding. He comes up to me, wants to know how my day was, because he remembered the conversation 8 hours earlier. And I thought a couple of things. Let's tie this back to leadership. I thought, my gosh, how do you show up when the cameras aren't on? There are no I'm just some lowly American walking through the lobby, for goodness sakes. And the fact that he took the time, he was so gracious. He was so respectful of his wife. He was respectful of me as a female. He stood up. I thought, my gosh, I need to learn from this guy. So when I think about authenticity, humility, inspiration, not only did he inspire those group of golfers, and by the way, the U.S. won.
Oh, yeah.
But not only, yeah, you got to get that in there, Dennis. Not only that, but I thought he's inspiring me to be better in how I show up, even on the days off. That's what I took away. And so he's one of my favorite. I love that man.
What a wonderful story. You're so right. Is how we do show up all the time. It's not just, I think it's even Peggy right in your own home, and you see the way he respected his wife and so forth. And even if you aren't being seen by other people, they know. They'll pick up on it. And it's really quite interesting to see how that happens. And I think what you just said there about how do you show up when the cameras aren't on, that is brilliant. That is exactly the way that as leaders, I think that's the leadership piece. That's not I think the camera's on, that's the showman, person piece. The leader is what you just said, is when it's the camera's not on. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, Dennis, I'm a big believer in that. And when, again, the camera is a metaphor. It's when you're not in front of your team. It's when you're in, well, look, we're seeing actually, Dennis, let's flip to the counter side for just a second here. We're seeing some ugly sides of leadership when they don't realize the camera is running and caught on a hot mic. And you're like, wow. And so it is really, truly being authentic to yourself 24/7. Yes, we all have down moments. Certainly I do. But at the core, do you show up with goodness in your heart?
Hey, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here.
Whereabouts are you in the world today?
I'm actually on one of my islands in Sweden.
Oh, awesome.
You might hear some waves clucking in the background.
Ah, that'd be very nice. Very nice indeed. Fredrik, I've given a brief background or explanation about who you are and so forth, introduction. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your background?
Yeah, I think that was exemplary, actually. I think that was a good summary of what I do. I have studied and I continue to study human creativity. That's my passion.
Yeah, excellent. And so how did you get into that and leadership and other things and change? How did you get into this, Fredrik?
I went to university in the early 1990s, and in 1993, I went to study one semester in America, and I had a girlfriend in Sweden. And at that university, they had something called the internet, and where you could send emails, which meant I could send letter to my girlfriend in one day instead of 2 weeks. So I said, you have to go find a computer that has internet somewhere. And that's when I saw the internet. Then I came back to Sweden in 93. And in 94, I wrote my university thesis on internet and marketing. I think it was the first thesis on the topic in Sweden. And my professor first wouldn't let me write on it. And then when I had written it, he copied it and put it into a book and published the book. That's when I learned never to trust professors. But so suddenly I was an internet expert, and I was 27 years old. I had studied internet for 10 weeks, which meant I knew 10 weeks more about the internet than anyone else did in Sweden. And I was therefore an expert, and I became a speaker. People asked me to come and speak about this thing that I knew so much about. I like to say sometimes being an expert means knowing more than the audience. And in my case, I knew 10 weeks more about the internet than anyone else. That made me an expert. And then since then, I've been trying to stay 10 weeks ahead of everyone else.
Wow. Yeah, you just keep staying ahead of your audience and then you're all good there. And it's interesting how life has started to change even then in those days in the sense of the internet and being able to send your girlfriend a letter or a message within 2 days or 1 day versus sending it over 2 weeks. It's amazing how things have changed, and we see things changing even more so now as well. Do you see a lot of things changing for us in the sense of technology is driving change?
Yeah, so basically for the first 5 years in the 1990s, I spoke about the internet. I was an internet speaker. And then in 2000, I got tired of it because I felt now we thought about everything we can think about the internet. So now what am I going to speak about? And now 20 years later, we're still talking about digital transformation. It's mind-blowing, actually. But it's fascinating because the change that we've seen in the last 20 years is nothing compared to the change we will see in the next 20 years. And that's what makes it so interesting to study the topic right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the next 20 years, you're so right. There's going to be a lot of change happening for sure. Fredrik, here's a question for you, and that is that now this person could be alive or the person can be from history. Who's your favorite leader and why?
Okay, I think that's a very good question. But I want to answer it in a different. I would say my favorite leader is all the unknown leaders that do all this amazing work and never get any acknowledgement for it or any recognition for it. Like someone starting a Sunday school somewhere and get the kids together so they have something to do on the weekend. Or if you want me to put a name on it, I can put a name on it. Her name is Robin, and she runs an organization for children of sex workers in the slums of Mumbai. She goes out and finds these totally neglected children, and she runs this tiny organization on a tiny budget and with these traumatized girls, and very little recognition, very little reward, a lot of hard work, and does amazing work. And and she's amazing, but there are millions of people like that all over the world.
Yeah, and it's amazing the work that they do. And as you said, it's unrecognized. It's being done in the background, but it's so important work, right? It's work that they do that has major impact in our future, in our children for the future, in our generations for the future. Would you agree?
Yeah, innovation is a very important topic, but I would go so far to say that leadership is an even more important topic, because if you don't have leaders, not very much gets done. Yes, you people can do things one-on-one, but then we still need self-leadership. So either way, we need leadership to get things done. It's a very important topic. And I think it's really good like I said, I studied the internet in the beginning, and I saw the potential of sharing knowledge and information. And to think about how much leadership is improving in the world because things like this, free education, free podcast, free blogs or whatever on how helping leaders become better, because God knows in the history of mankind, we have had a lot of bad leaders and a lot of people who never had any ability to learn how to become better leaders. So now you can sit in, I don't know where, you can sit in Afghanistan, for God's sake, and want to study how to become a leader. Now you can do that from the best leadership consultants and coaches anywhere in the world. And that in itself is going to lead to even more innovation. However you look at it, it's going to be an interesting time.
Yeah, that global reach of the internet and being able to do that and having that access to this material, as you said, is tremendous. And it'll be wonderful to see where it's going to go, but also what other, I'm going to call them product, but I'm going to say the outcomes or results that we'll see the new leaders of the future. And it's going to be really exciting to see what that happen.
Yeah, I actually pulled my kids out of school. So 1 year ago, so we're now homeschooling our kids, and we are doing it to teach them how to learn so that they're ready for whenever they come out. So basically they have one teacher in the UK, they have one teacher in the Philippines, they have a coding teacher sits in India. So we're basically finding the teachers that we can find online to teach them. And then in the morning, they get 1 hour with the teacher and says, this is what you're going to do today. And then they go on and they do it. And they are 5, well, soon 6, 8, and 10. And they're working independently by assignment that they've been given on in video chats or online. And they go on and they do online research for the material they need to do and things like that. And they're learning very well how to work in a world that is, because they're growing up as true internet digital native people. And unfortunately, a lot of the kids that go to schools today are still not. The last industry to adapt to this new world is regular school. And that's very sad because they're not learning how they should work and how we will work in the future, how we are working today, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other beautiful thing about that is that the kids are learning how to be independent, how to stand on their own 2 feet and do things and go out and learn themselves rather than being somebody standing over the top of them, telling them what to do.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.